97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with 97.3 ESPN.com's Andrew DiCecco. Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast.
You know, we recognize the ability of the roster that's put together right now. And I think we have the ability to do something really special with this group, but it's going to take a lot of hard work.
Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, it's Football at 4.
All right, time now for Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and brought to you by PlaySugarHouse.com. Sign up now. They'll match your first deposit up to $250. Andrew DiCecco is in. His observations are up at 97.3 ESPN.com as we'll get a lot of insight now on this tie from yesterday. Why the tie? What's the message there? And can this thing get turned around? Let's bring in Andrew DiCecco from 97.3 ESPN.com. Football at 4 right now on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Andrew, I guess we got to start with the message yesterday from Doug Pederson. Now, today, during his press conference, he did say, in hindsight, he probably would have gone for it again. But what was the message at the time yesterday that they decided to punt the football? What is he telling his team?
Yeah, I was trying to process what I was watching yesterday in real time. The message that he sent is we're playing to not to lose rather than we're going to go for the win and try and get something, put something up in the win column and get something positive going, knowing that you have a murderer's row of games coming up ahead here. I mean, when you look at it was 4th and 12, I'm surely you have a play to get you that first down. You spike the ball, there's a chance. You throw a Hail Mary. You hope for a defensive pass interference. There's so many different outcomes that could have happened. But to, punt the football away and not give your team a chance to pull one out there at the end, I mean, that just to me showed someone that was just playing to not to lose.
I mean, in this situation, the message to not only Carson Wentz but his defense as well. I mean, here's a guy, Doug Pederson, that is known for having a lot of gumption. He's a guy who makes those decisions. And yesterday, it seems like he also has lost confidence in his quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like it was an all-round lack of confidence in the team. I mean, when you go toe-to-toe with the Cincinnati Bengals and you're already able to muster 23 points up against that defense and you're going back and forth, you're not really inspiring much confidence in your coaching staff that you can stop them and that you can punch the football in the score and end this thing. And I think that it was one of those things where let's just get out of here without taking a loss, because you saw what was happening there with the defense. Joe Burrow was moving the football on those guys, and he was finding the openings, and he knew what areas to attack on the field. And then you got to see the Eagles' offense. They were starting to move the football there, but the offensive line all day long in pass protection was suspect. I thought they did some positive things in the running game. They generated some movement there up front, but I mean, it was a big risk in the offense knowing that he was going to have to drop back and throw the football.
Didn't it seem like in overtime, too, when they did get the ball on the Bengals' half of the field, they were almost saying, like, hey, we'll live with a 50-yard attempt. I mean, it was almost like they were living with a 50-plus yarder. And I know you have Jake Elliott, who has hit some big shots before, he's hit some big kicks, but still, I mean, it just doesn't seem like Doug Pederson. That's where I have the issue. We know what Doug Pederson has been throughout his tenure here, and this is the complete opposite, it feels like.
Yeah, where was the aggressiveness of a coach that went for it on 4th down in the Super Bowl? Where was that coach that known for his gumption, like you mentioned? He pretty much, to me, he wanted to take the ball out of Wentz's hands. He seemed to be afraid of committing a turnover, and really wanted to play safe, relying on the big leg that Jake Elliott has, rather than try to put the game away and get out of there with a win. It just seemed like they were being very conservative in the play calling at the end there when they should have been keeping their foot on the gas.
Yeah, Andrew, you look at also the play of Carson Wentz, and I mean, I guess if you're watching that and it's 4th down and 12 and your alternative is, hey, I got to put the ball in his hands, are you watching a Carson Wentz right now that is not salvageable? I guess is Doug asking that question too. Can I trust my quarterback?
Well, you got to see his play was marginally better than it has been, Mike. But it certainly needs a lot of improvement to get to where the team has aspirations to go, which is the postseason ultimately. I think that you got to see that ball to Zach Ertz down the sideline was a beautiful touch pass. That was his best throw of the season, really, so far. But you haven't seen enough of that. He's been inaccurate. You saw the play on the wheel route to Miles Sanders that he beat Akeem Davis-Gator, the linebacker, on that he wasn't able to connect on. John Hightower got behind the cornerback a couple times there, and they weren't able to connect with him. There were guys running down the field that he wasn't connecting, whether it was accuracy issues or he just wasn't seeing the field fully. So I think that there's a little hesitation from Doug Pederson there, and the mechanics need to get fixed. And certainly he's not being taught that at the NovaCare facility. Obviously, we're not privy to what goes on there, of course, but you have to be able to take the coaching, and every week we're seeing the same thing, falling away from throws, inaccurate or poor ball placement and things like that at the most inopportune times, it seems like, when you have open guys. And it's going to take a while for this to get corrected here because, like we were talking about, the schedule doesn't get any easier coming up here.
How long do you think the leash is for Carson Wentz? Now, I'm someone who thinks, look, he deserves way more than 3 games. Mm-hmm. He deserves the respect to work himself out of this. You mentioned it. It was a little bit better. Not that it was great, but you did see a little bit better play out of him at times. He was using his feet more. So, if you're put in this situation, do you just ride it out and say, Carson, you got to keep going out there and figure this out?
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think that the leash is going to be substantially longer for Carson Wentz than it would be for, a lot of guys. He's the guy that you've invested in substantially. He's proven to be a high-level quarterback when things have gone well around him as far as having the offensive pieces to run, and his ability and confidence in the offense when he has those guys around him. You get some guys back healthy and some things going, and you get to see that he's a rhythm quarterback, and you got to see that at the end of last season when he was, kind of carrying those practice squad players into the playoffs. I think he's someone that really needs to string together a handful of good games and really get into a rhythm. But he's proven that he can get himself out of slumps before, and he, like you said, he earns that respect. He deserves that respect to get for that opportunity to have that. So.
Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4, looking back at what happened yesterday. Some of his observations, you can get them right now at 97.3 ESPN.com. You asked, has Doug lost his edge? Is Doug, to you right now, the team's biggest issue?
I do think that he has lost his edge a little bit, and I think that has to do with continuously coming up short and failing to execute on routine plays that they've thrived on in the past. It's just simple penalties. You look at the Matt Pryor issue, which is inexcusable, by the way. That's a cuttable offense. They would ordinarily probably find him on the waiver wire if they weren't so light on the offensive line. They committed a ton of penalties yesterday. They're just making errors that you would typically see in the preseason, which no one had. So I do think that he's playing more closer to the vest and not taking as many liberties or chances as he ordinarily would. And I also think that injuries play a factor into that. And until you start to get some guys back or get into some semblance of a rhythm on offense and defense, I think you're going to continue to see a conservative approach from Doug Pederson.
You touched on the offensive line a couple of times here, so let's go down that road. Jason Peters, that had to have been the worst game of his entire career.
Yeah, hey, listen, Jason Peters had a tough go of it yesterday. He looked completely outmatched by an athletic edge rusher in Carl Lawson. Carl Lawson is not by any means an all-world player. He's a rotational end, but he does have a lot of quickness and athleticism and has an outstanding understanding of how to play with leverage. And Jason Peters was slow out of his stance, and it seemed like he was on skates the entire game. And Carl Lawson was able to capitalize. He had 2 sacks in the stat sheet, but he could have had at least 2 more on other occasions. Jason Peters was a complete liability in that game, obviously. And then at the end of the game, they had to put Jordan Mailata in because Peters was injured. You don't know. Going forward, this is going to continuously be a problem throughout the whole season. He's going to struggle with these athletic rushers at 38 years old. He's going to come in and out of the lineup all the time. So what do you do if you're the Eagles? Well, you don't have a ton of options. Do you plug in Jordan Mailata? Do you throw Jack Driscoll over there and hope for the best? Or do you try and see what's out there on the free agent market, which I can tell you right now, there's not a lot of great options out there. There's not a lot of veteran guys that can step in there and give you the kind of play that Jordan Mailata can't really give you. So, I mean, outside of trading for, a swing tackle or something like that before the trade deadline, I mean, these are going to be the things that they're going to have to kind of figure out a way to mask at moving forward here.
You also wrote about at 97.3 ESPN.com, Miles Sanders in midseason form. The one question, I guess, would be, all right, why did they get away from him, number one? Number two, is it concerning that this is the second week in a row that Doug mentioned that he was fatigued at the end of the game?
Well, to answer the second part of that question, fatigue is going to be normal in Miles' case because he was out of mission for so long over the summer, where everybody else was getting back into football shape. I think that once you get to weeks 3 or 4, that shouldn't necessarily be a problem. But Miles Sanders, he handled 20 carries last week and 18 carries this week. He was running extremely tough through the middle of the line. I thought Jason Kelsey had an outstanding game for the second week in a row. Nate Herbig and Matt Pryor did a nice job generating some movement up front as well. And he just accelerates through the hole, knows how to get skinny through it and maximize each yard, and maximize the holes that's there and get every yard that he can. I think that his vision is vastly superior than what it was last season. He's making better decisions at the line of scrimmage rather than trying to always bounce it to the outside. He's making good decisions. That's what I mean by when I see him in midseason form, when things really started to click for him. And I think for the fatigue part, think of this as the preseason for Miles Sanders. You get the very limited opportunities, and then usually when you get to like the third or fourth week, that's when they're ready for the regular season. And in his case, he didn't really have much of the summer months to prepare.
Do you think that's why Doug Pederson didn't run the ball as much as he did? I mean, this was a game before we actually saw it go down on Sunday. We talked about how this is an opportunity for the Eagles' offensive line to get some push to run the ball, and you saw it work in the beginning, and then you saw 3 and out, and it's like they just abandoned the run, which Doug is known to do. Do you think that maybe with what you just said is a reason why Doug elected to go in another direction?
Yeah, I think, Hunter, to be honest with you, I think a lot of it had to do with, some of there was fatigue and they didn't want to overuse him because Miles Sanders really, in an ideal situation, should be getting about 16 to 18 touches a game. Whether you want to kind of spread that out for receptions and carries, I think that's probably the optimal usage that you want to see from him. But the thing is they're not getting a whole lot of production out of Boston Scott like we thought that they would. And Corey Clement struggled to find any kind of holes. His vision, he's really regressed since that 2017 season. It takes him a while to get going at the line of scrimmage. He's running into the back of his linemen. He's not hitting the holes that are there. And I think, and you're seeing a lot of negative runs from him, and it really sets the offense back in early down situations. And then with Boston Scott, get him out there on screen passes and things like that. Screen passes are extensions of the running game. There are certain things where those two guys aren't getting something going on the ground. Well, use the receiver prowess to the offense's advantage and and open up use some of those dimensions that are there available to you. I think that they got into that pass-happy situation. It reminded me of the Washington game in the second half, where they were just going to the air when there wasn't much out there. I mean, Greg Ward was the only receiver that was generating any semblance of separation among all the receivers yesterday. So there wasn't a whole lot happening there. Obviously, Dallas Guy had left the game, so you got to see that Wentz was comfortable. His two most comfortable options were Zach Ertz and Greg Ward. But outside of that, I mean, you're forcing balls to guys that aren't open, and the guys that are open, he wasn't connecting with them.
Yeah,
and I thought that really started to spiral out of control in that second half.
Did you feel that it looked to me that Ward was the only guy he trusted? I mean, obviously Ertz, but Ward as the receivers was the only guy he trusts.
Yeah, and the thing with Ward is, and I would love to get into a little bit of a DiCecco-Whiteside conversation here because they kind of go hand in hand. The thing with Ward is he's a very quarterback-friendly wide receiver. He knows how to find the soft spots in the zone. He catches the football. He's tough. He can play inside. He can play outside. In fact, the touchdown that he scored on, he was lined up at the Z position, which is a position that, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside would ordinarily be, playing. Use his size and to his advantage. He was on the sideline. These are things that, Greg Ward, Carson knows where Greg Ward's going to be. He's had a lot of repetition with Greg Ward in practice dating back to 2017. Greg's an outstanding route runner. He was a quarterback, a decorated quarterback at the University of Houston. So he has a very good understanding of route concepts and where and depths and different things like that. And I think that Carson, there's a comfortability there with Greg Ward, and that's why you're seeing that connection. And he was the only guy that really stepped up last season as well to help them in that postseason run. So there's definitely that rapport there. But you really have to get something else going there. You're not getting anything from J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. At this point, what does he give you that a Deontay Burnett can't give you from working the short to intermediate routes? You're not using him in the red zone, which is what he was touted for coming out of college. I mean, he's playing 18. He played 18 snaps yesterday. Obviously, he had that lower body injury pregame. But, I mean, it always seems to be something with this guy. And you got to wonder, 19 games into his career, when is the light going to come on for this guy? And Alshon Jeffrey's nearing his return. You know, I wouldn't rule out J-Jaw getting deactivated when Alshon's ready to come back, because he doesn't play special teams. He's not being utilized in the offense. I don't understand what his role is here.
Yeah, it's a great point, is that here's a guy in the second round, and it doesn't help him by any measures that there's guys in his draft class that are running all over the field, putting up big plays, and he is giving you nothing. I mean, over the sample of 2 years now, 3 games and last year, John Hightower is out-snapping him and now out-targeting him. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, in a big way. And John Hightower, he played 78 snaps yesterday, and he was a guy that I thought had a good opportunity to attack Darius Phillips, the second corner for Cincinnati. He doesn't run particularly well. He's a former wide receiver at Western Michigan. Doesn't have great size. Hightower's more of a lanky guy that can go up and catch the football in contested catch situations. And I thought that there was going to be opportunities there for the Eagles to, really open things up for him down the field, which he was open a couple of times. He just never really got a chance to see what he could do in the third level of the field there. But with Arcega-Whiteside, he's not what the Eagles envisioned them getting, which is that. And when you look at his usage, there's a lack of trust. There's a clear lack of trust from the quarterback and from the coaching staff to run precise routes, to come up to catch the football, which is most important, and to come back for the football, and all these different nuances that you expect from a receiver. There's just a lack of trust there, and you also got to see that in years past with guys like Matt Collins and Shelton Gibson. They just, for whatever reason, they're selecting these guys, and they're not comfortable enough to put them out on the field. When the Eagles' offense was struggling from a speed deficiency standpoint in 2018, Shelton Gibson couldn't even get on the field, and you're seeing something similar with Arcega-Whiteside. You need that this team doesn't score a wealth of points here, and when you get into the red zone, somebody like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, that's his bread and butter, and he's on the sideline in those situations. So at this point, it's fair to say, his role, the time's kind of running out for him.
Last year, Desean Jackson got hurt early, but when we saw him in that Washington game, we thought, wow, we need that. We need that type of speed. I know he's injured now. He's playing banged up with the hamstring, but even when he is out there this season, it doesn't seem to have that feel that he's taking guys over the top and that's helping out this offense. Is there something to be said about Desean Jackson in this case, or do you think that really is just a product of Carson Wentz and his struggles?
That's an interesting that's an interesting point, because I think I've kind of tussled with this over the past couple of weeks, really, because you really haven't seen that breakout performance from Desean Jackson, the one we've grown accustomed to seeing over the years, where he's beating guys for 50-yard bombs over the top and things like that. I think a lot of that, Hunter, has to do with the regression from Carson Wentz, the lack of teams aren't threatened by his deep ball. He's missing guys by a wide margin. And then, in the Rams game, for instance, he didn't really take many deep shots at all. It just seems to be one extreme or the other. And I think teams aren't really concerned with Carson Wentz based on what they've seen on film. And they're able to play up on these receivers. And the offense is very condensed and stagnant, kind of like what you've seen over the past 2 seasons. There's nobody there really strikes fear in opposing defenses because of the play calling and the scheme.
Yep, tough day out there all around. Obviously, Wentz and Pederson at the top of the list, and the offensive line had some moments, but the offensive line did perform well enough to allow Miles Sanders to have a big day. Why does Doug? I know it's tough to ask you this question. Why does Doug get away from running the football? But was that the recipe to stick with that run yesterday?
Yeah, early in the game, that was one of those things where it just seemed very evident. Run the football, and this game's going to be over by halftime. They weren't able to stop Miles Sanders. They were getting great push up front. Guys were getting to the second level with regularity. Miles Sanders was in the zone. He was hitting the hole. He was accelerating through the line like he was shot out of a cannon. And, you got the sense where, you play, you really controlled the clock with that. And then you also were able to kind of put some points up quickly and really kind of drain the clock at the end there. And it just seemed to me like that seemed like the ideal script to kind of run with. And they got pass happy there. I don't know whether that's Doug's former, quarterback background or just the way that the NFL is, the current landscape of the NFL is just, pass to get the lead and then run to, kind of preserve it and ice the game. I'm not necessarily sure. I couldn't answer that, but it just seems like every year it's the same thing, whether it was Andy Reid or Doug Pederson. The running game gets going, they get into a rhythm, and then for whatever reason, they get away from that, and oftentimes that results in a negative game script.
If you were calling the shots after that penalty on the field goal, are you kicking the 64-yarder or are you going for it on fourth down?
Or are you punting?
Or do you respect the punt?
I think I'm going for it on fourth down because worst case scenario, you hope for a defensive pass interference call. The one thing about going for it on fourth down or even throwing a Hail Mary is that you don't have a ton of size out there on the field. But surely you have there's a play that you can draw up that you can get you 12 yards. You hope to hustle up there and spike the football and then have a more manageable field goal. Worst case scenario, if you miss, if you don't convert, well, the Bengals likely needed 10 to 15 yards with limited time there to be able to be in field goal range. Randy Bullock doesn't have a particularly strong leg. So, you take those odds all the time. It just seemed like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, okay, and I'm just going to play the other side real quick because I think the message is a poor one. Optically, it's awful to say we are going to punt it to tie, but the tie helps you out more times than not. They did,
sure.
9-6-1, got them to the playoffs one year when Dallas was 9-7. Most teams, when you get the tie does come into play and for the positive. So I wish he would have just said, look, a tie is it doesn't feel like a win, but a lot of times it is the equivalent of a win in a situation where the division seems like it's going to be another ugly road. That tying that game is certainly better than losing that game.
I agree with you there, but the one I would counter that by saying, what kind of message does that send to your team?
Yep, that's it. That's the one thing is optically, and the message is terrible.
Right. Now there's, your head coach showing that he lacks confidence in your team. That's going to kind of resonate with the locker room. And, as these losses continue to pile up, things like that tend to fester and can lead to bigger problems. And I think that, he should have, obviously the optics are terrible, but he should have went for it and stand behind your team and, be the coach that he is, be Doug Pederson. He's
well, chances are, Andrew, if he goes for it and they don't end up getting it, they tie the game anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So to punt the football there was like the worst possible outcome of all the different outcomes that could have been there. And I had a hard time processing what I was watching. I was like, what is going on here? Like every time they play the Bengals lately, it just seems like it's one extreme or the other. They got blown out, in Carson's rookie year. They tied with McNabb. They tied yesterday. It's just the Bengals have been a thorn in the Eagles' side for whatever reason.
I do agree that optically speaking, to just punt it there just sends the message of we don't know what's going on. It was almost like no one knew what was going on. The Bengals didn't know what was going on. They didn't know to have a receiver back there to receive the punt. It was just a wild play, but 0-2-1, and San Francisco's next. We'll start to look ahead to that game later on this week. Andrew's back tomorrow, Jeff Mosher on Wednesday and Friday, and Adam Kaplan on Thursday for Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash. DiCecco NFL on Twitter. Give him a follow over there and check out his observations on yesterday's game at 97.3ESPN.com. We'll talk to you tomorrow, pal.
Yes, sir. Sounds good.
Yeah, and tomorrow we will hear from Jim Schwartz and see what he has to say about that defense.